elbow is connected to the arm bone, the elbow is connected to the arm bone, the elbow is connected...
Hello everyone, it's me again, Earl from the LearnAnatomy team, and I'd like to thank our fans who have been writing in, and I had a really wonderful email from Sarah recently, who really enjoyed the last video we did, which was explaining the passage of food into the mouth, right through the body, so thinking of the digestive tract as one long tube and the different parts. But today I've received a mail from Frank, who's studying, and it's that time of year where a lot of students in HE, higher education, and FE, further education, are taking exams, and what he's revising is the bony anatomy, or the osteological features of the elbow joint, and he asked me to just do a very quick video just pointing out the main bony features. So the focus of this particular video is really just coming to grips and better understanding the bony markings that comprise the elbow joint. So the elbow joint, as we all know, is the main joint that connects the arm with the forearm. And typically we describe it as a hinge joint. It works the same way in which a door opens or closes, or a book opens and closes. But what we need to understand is that the elbow joint is a composite. It's made up of 3 bones. So if we look at our bony model here, we can see that this main bone, the humerus, is the main bone of the arm. And then we've got 2 bones that make up the forearm. So we've got the bone on the medial side, and a lot of students get confused with which of the 2 bones, the ulna or the radius, is the bone of the medial side of the forearm. And the best way that I can teach them this is, if you get lost, just think, most of us go I'm not sure, but if you think of the U standing for ulna, the M standing for medial, we've got the ulna on the medial side, little finger side, and the radius with the round head on the lateral side. So we really have articulations between the humerus, the radius, and the ulna. So what we're going to examine today is the distal portion of the arm and the proximal portion of the forearm. So as we move down, we'll notice that the main joint that we're looking at is really the ulna, this part, articulating with the arm bone, or humerus. And the part that you can feel at the back of your arm, so this part over here, is called the olecranon process, and the posterior part, we get the olecranon process fitting into what we call the olecranon fossa, this little divot at the back of the arm. So the process, a process will always fit into a fossa. So when we extend our elbow joint, what we have a hard end feel because we've got bone meeting bone. So we've got the olecranon part actually articulating within the olecranon fossa. If we go on to the front of the bone, the anterior view, let's now move across and examine these key features. So if we thinking of our forearm in the way that this is laid out, okay, so this is on the thumb side, so the radial side would be the lateral side, the ulnar side would be the medial side. So if we're looking at the first part, we've got these 2 little markings, one on the lateral, one on the medial side, called the Epicondyles. And the Epicondyles play an important role. For example, the lateral epicondyle is a common point where the extensor muscles of the forearm originate. So often in tennis you may hear of disorders or conditions called lateral epicondylitis or epicondylosis, which is really an inflammation of the tendon, the common tendon that helps us to extend. Similarly, on the medial side, over the medial epicondyle, that's quite common in sports like golf or cricket at times with throwing, where there may be an inflammation on the common flexor muscles. So the muscles on the anterior side of the forearm originate onto the medial epicondyle, and they enable flexion of the forearm and some of the wrist and hand. So this one, which actually looks like a head, looks like a round head, the Latin word for head is cap. Remember, we wear a cap on our head. So this portion of the bone is called the capitulum. And this portion over here on the medial side, trochlea. So the capitulum and the trochlea. Okay, very important features there. And I'm just looking now because I've received another mail coming in asking me about other aspects of the elbow. So I'm going to try and integrate those as I speak. Okay, if we move down, the radial head is round, as we can see, and that's important because the radial head, this little thickening on the head, is called the articulating circumference. It's round, hence the word radial. And that rounded head allows the forearm to do important things: pronate and supinate. But we'll come back to that in a little while. Okay. On the side here, we have a little ridge, and that ridge is called the lateral, if it's on the lateral side, supracondylar. So it's just above the condyles, superior to them, so hence the word supracondylar, the lateral supracondylar ridge, and the medial supracondylar ridge, and they're going to be important in terms of muscle attachment as well. Okay, so if we now go back and we look at the ulna, and we look at the articulating part of the ulna, inside there, that little divot is called the Trochlea notch. And that plays an important role because that's going to articulate, as you can see at the back, with the trochlea of the arm bone. Okay. Then we also have, coming through here, this little part that sticks up is called the coronoid process. And as it comes up, it gets trapped into a little fossa that sits up there again, called the coronoid fossa. So that little tip end of the ulna in the anterior compartment, the coronoid process, fits into the coronoid fossa. And the best way to learn this, that you don't get confused with the bony names of the shoulder, for example, and the elbow joint. Remember, on the shoulder we've got the coracoid, but on the elbow we've got the coronoid. And think about it, when you hit your elbow, you're annoyed with it. So that's the coronoid process, which articulates with the coronoid fossa. Okay. Over here, we've got the radial tuberosity, and that's where one of the tendons for the biceps brachii insert. Okay, remember it splits under the antebrachium fascia and splits into almost a Y shape to attach or insert onto a process on the radius, which is called the radial tuberosity. Okay. So if we go back to this, the ulna articulating with the arm really forms the main joint, and that is the humeral ulnar joint, or ulnar humeral joint, and that is typically your hinge joint. It's a synovial joint. We've got a little bit of articulation with the proximal end of the radius, which is concave, and the capitulum of the arm bone, and that fits in there, that surface over there, looking at that, and that would also aid with flexion extension in the sagittal plane. But importantly, we've got the round head of the radius and the articulating part, which fits into a radial little notch on the ulna, and that enables this pivoting motion. So that's another synovial joint, and because we have this pivoting motion, that enables pronation and supination of the forearm. We also have that at the proximal end, and we'll notice when we look at the wrist and hand, we'll look at the structures that enable that at the distal end of the forearm. Okay. Over here we have the neck of the radius, and typically the radius is quite narrow at the top end, at the proximal end, but if we look at the radius just before it articulates with the bones of the wrist, we can see it becomes much thicker. It becomes almost a triangular shape, and that's important for the articulation of the radius with the carpal bones. In fact, the radius is the main bone of the forearm that articulates with the carpus to form the radiocarpal joints. Remember that the ends of these condyles, the capitulum and trochlea, are coated or covered with hyaline or articular cartilage that enables the smooth functioning of the elbow joint. Also sitting at the back, we have bursa, so we have the olecranon bursa. You may see that in times from an overuse type trauma, it looks as though someone has a tennis ball hanging off the back of their arm, okay? That is bursitis with an inflammation of the bursa. What's also important to note is that one of the nerves that comes off the brachial plexus, remember the brachial plexus is the nerve supply to the upper limb. It originates from C5 all the way down to T1, that's the root of the nerves, and one of the main nerves, the ulnar nerve, actually comes over the olecranon process. So if you bang the posterior aspect of your elbow, you get that funny feeling, and hence a lot of people started calling the arm bone the funny bone, but it's really the ulnar nerve being knocked and creating a different type of feeling. So just to recap the most important points that I wanted to go through, we looked at the distal end of the arm. The posterior compartment has a divot or fossa called the olecranon fossa, into which the olecranon process articulates. Then we spoke about, if we turn it around, the lateral and medial supracondylar ridges, then the lateral and medial epicondyles. The capitulum articulates with the radius, whereas the trochlea articulates with the ulna, as you can see, and this inner surface of the ulna is called the trochlea notch. The little tip over there is called the coronoid process, and that comes up and articulates with the coronoid fossa. The main joint is really the ulna and the arm, creating that synovial hinge joint, enabling flexion and extension in the sagittal plane. And then we have the radius articulating with the capitulum. So the radius is concave, where the capitulum is convex. And then finally, the radial head articulates with the ulna. It's got a little radial notch there. It fits in, and that enables pronation and supination of the forearm. Supporting the elbow, it's not just the bones that are important, but we have some really important ligaments. So for example, on the radial side, we have the radial collateral ligaments, which create part of the capsule around the elbow joint. And then sitting around that radial head, we have a circular ligament called the annular. Annular means circular. We addressed this when we looked at the annulus fibrosus, for example, which is part of the intervertebral disc. Annular is a circular ligament, almost like a fan belt. So think of this metal clip as the annular part holding that head of the radius in place. And then on the ulnar side, we've got the ulnar collateral ligaments, which try to strengthen and stabilize the medial aspect of the capsule itself. So hopefully that gave you a brief understanding of some of the bony markings, some of the ligamentous attachments, also thinking about the pathway of the ulnar nerve. And in the next videos, we'll continue our journey by building upon that, looking at the osteological features of the hand and wrist, and then going back and building on the muscle layers, tendinous structures, fascia, so that you build up a complete picture of the articulation, movement and function of the upper limb. So thank you for writing in. Check out our LearnAnatomy website. We have a lot of workshops coming up, and we look forward to meeting you soon. So thank you for writing in. Please keep the mails coming, and until next time, goodbye.